Hello there, friends. Hope you're getting on well. I recently saw a clip about incels. And to be honest, I'd totally forgotten about incels. I forgot they were a thing. It was more sort of circa 2015 thing, but they're back in some documentary recently. And as always, when we think about incels, the mainstream media really went to town on them. Quite unfairly, in my view. I mean, I viewed incels very much as a symptom of modernity. You take away the traditional structures of manhood, of marriage, of the organisation between the genders, you're bound to get, this forgotten community, which ranges from the mildly disaffected to the people who really are in quite a dark place psychologically. And normally incels are associated with violence, but as we'll see, I think that's a little bit overblown by the media. Because again, I don't think the liberal world really wants to look at its own flaws, and instead will just, point the finger at these lost young men. I should say, it's clear that there is a problem with some of the incels, but I think it's less of a problem than the BBC would have you think. You can see here, incels inside a dark world of online hate. And this is the idea the average person has. But here we have a clip with the interviewer Ross Kemp. For any international viewers, he used to play a TV tough guy on one of our soap operas, and now he does sort of journalism. But he's finding out that he's kind of been misled a bit with regards to incels.
Incels are a misogynistic group. Effectively, they hate women. How many incels have become killers?
We'd say roughly between 7 to 15 around the world.
Sorry, how many?
Estimates typically range from between 7 to 15 incel killers, and roughly 59 people have been killed in ideologically motivated incel killings.
In the United Kingdom?
Around the world.
Even one murder is too many, of course. But inceldom doesn't appear to be the phenomenon I thought it was. It's clear that this documentary needs to take a different direction.
So effectively, I have got everything wrong about incels. I think that they kill lots of girls globally and in the United Kingdom. I think they're a threat, a permanent threat to the security of this country. I think there are hundreds of thousands of them. I think that they are generally white and right-leaning. So all those preconceptions that I have are wrong.
Many of them, yes, and it's not your fault, Ross, because if you were to just pay attention to the media that is most often put out there about incels, it often espouses exactly the stereotypical depiction that you bought into at the beginning. So don't be too hard on yourself, but there is a lot of misinformation there about this topic that it's really good to appeal to the research.
Right, so as Ross Kemp points to, if anybody is being murdered for these ideologies, it's clearly still a problem. It's just this seems to have been overblown somewhat by the international media, really because it suits the narrative of the liberal regime, i.e. Men are a problem, they need to be managed back into these sort of liberal priors so they can be good, healthy, normal people who celebrate girl bosses and feminism. But of course, I've pointed this out many times on this channel. It seems to me that young men have been completely forgotten. And when society, the mainstream, does try and help them, they basically just try and manufacture them into really defective females. To be a good man is to kind of be basically aping femininity, share your feelings and be emotional. Now, as I've said, it's not that it's wrong to share your feelings necessarily. If you're in a real bad way, you might need to speak to an elder or someone, fine. But this idea of just talking it out all the time isn't exactly the fix I think the liberal mainstream makes it out to be. You might recall they've been hammering this now for 20 years and the male crisis still continues, but they just hammer on with the rhetoric because it's ideological. It's not so much about what's going on the ground. I said a while ago as well, you may remember, years ago I went to some personal development conference in London. Must be about 10 years ago plus now. And of course, at this time I was very interested in men's work and initiation and spiritual work and personal development. And they had this brochure for the weekend in London of events, and there was one session for men in the whole of this thing of about 36 sessions. And of course, the one session was about, how to not be a toxic male, how to share your feelings. And I counted there were 6 sessions for women: how to be a girl boss, how to present well, how to get promoted, how to be a tough, I can do it by myself, Andrew Tate version of a woman. And of course, as you might imagine, this is why the online world became so hypnotic to men, because they were capable on the online world of hearing advice that was unshackled from the liberal regime, which was always through this same frame of men are a problem, men are toxic, be more like women. So of course, I think myself included, back in 2014-15, was imbibing all that content, because you're like, finally, somebody is actually treating me like a male. And a lot of this stuff works. And I've said many times, the red pill stuff is imperfect. When you look at it teleologically, it leads back into liberalism. Same with Andrew Tate. It's just money and women and cars and aren't I great, really? That's all right when you're young and you're learning. But I think as you mature, you realise, okay, look, that this isn't really good for me or society in the long run. My country, my tradition and the rest of it. So you sort of ideally mature through it. But broadly speaking, back then it was revolutionary. Because, we'd all been raised as millennials and Zoomers and the rest of it in this just liberal frame that was just so feminized and a complete lie to men. And in fact, it made them worse and more traumatized. So no wonder that there was this offset, really, of these men that were really left. And again, I was one of the people who sort of worked through it, but I could see even the people around me, there are some men that just, they might have been particularly lost in mental health issues, or they didn't want to do the work with the ladies, or they had some hang up, and they would go into the black pill. And I'm not saying the black pill is healthy. I think elements of it are brutal truths about life, but some of it, it is dark, and you can see that some men do make an identity out of it, and that is very unhealthy. But I think you can't ignore that this offset was always going to happen with the development of the liberal world, and again, the changes between the genders and the balance and marriage and structures of what it means to be a man. Of course you are going to have this happen, but the system wants to ignore it. And again, what makes it even worse, and this is still true to this day, is the implication of lost young men is what they need is less masculinity, when really what they actually need is more, but the sort of eldership is what they need, not Andrew Tate. It's all right when you're 21, I guess. But when you get older, you need the elder, the wise elder that gives you structure, mentorship, responsibility. But those men are all boomer liberals anyway now, so they will just feed them back into you're a toxic male if you don't like Zach Polanski and the rest of it. So it's a real mess for young men. And as I say, it's that balance that has to be struck between recognising really the massive psyop and destruction of masculine paths of initiation and meaning that's happened, without framing yourself as a victim, because again, that victim framing psychologically is very, very damaging. And I think many young men across the West have realised that when it comes to other groups, this constant idea of victimhood which is pushed to us towards other groups. And you can see why this becomes a sort of one for Western young men. And again, there is some truth to it, but as I say, the psychological frame of siege mentality never ends well, and it does lead people further into that dark side. I think as well, I've noticed it before that a lot of these lads were never really given any advice on how to deal with the real world. It's all just this nonsensical faint heart, never won fair dame. You're such a sweet guy, you'll meet a girl eventually, i.e. I don't want you. And they're kind of left alone with nothing to grow into. And then they find the red pill or the black pill, and it gives them a way to understand the harsh realities of life, but it becomes almost like a defense mechanism. And I saw a lot of this in the red pill world. And when that red pill worldview is challenged, many men really lash out, because again, you're taking away the one safety mechanism they have. And I do sympathize with that. But the problem with that, of course, as well, is you stay in that almost teenagehood of the red pill and the telos of the red pill and the black pill, which doesn't really guide your soul forward. As the ex-pickup guru, Roosh, he's completely disappeared into the Orthodox Christian life now, said when he went through all of this, modern Western man's journey is from blue pill, naivety, to the red pill, the harsh realities about life and women, the black pill, how hopeless it really is, and then the white pill, which is the God pill. That's the way out in his view. I think there's something to that. And the God pill is, of course, going beyond yourself, realizing that the world is fallen and always has been, but you can overcome it via the reawakening that goes on within you spiritually and traditionally. And I think this is why I wanted to explore this, because although in many senses this issue is sort of circa 2015, I still think the issues are very prevalent for men in the West, because the broader societal structures haven't meaningfully changed. So whether we call them incels or losers or, full of hate or the rest of it, whatever it is, the fundamental problem is still the same, despite the titles or symbols that we give the problem. Things that I've seen work in my own life and in other men that I've worked and coached with over the years, the spiritual life I think is essential, and I gesture towards that with Roosh, and there are many different ways we can understand it, but we're not talking about nonsense evangelicalism and kind of shouting and screaming at your local church. You don't even have to go to church if it doesn't suit you, but you do have to embrace the deeper spiritual life, and the deeper is the operative word there. What I mean by that is you recognize that the world is fallen, that human beings are fallen, that we always make a mess of things. And when we're detached from tradition, we really make a mess of things. We're bamboozled, but we think we've got it all figured out. That's modernity in a nutshell, really. We think we know everything because we've got our computer models and amazing tech and, the girl boss is in the office and it's all sorted now. But in reality, when you look at things behind the scenes, you realize it's basically falling apart, and we can all see we're just careering really into trouble. But the key thing, especially about the Christian approach, this can be in other approaches too, but what's so wise about the Christian approach is it roots the based realizations one makes in the premise of love, or you could even say the reality of love. And as I've been keen to express on this channel, when we say love, we don't mean smoochy woochy, isn't everything wonderful? I've got to be tolerant and accept everything. That's a modern degeneration, fragmentation of love. Of course, there is an empathetic side to love, but it's much richer than that. Love really means getting beyond yourself to realize the fallen nature of man and how we're away from our true orientation. And that can weirdly allow you to sympathize with people who are lost. At least that happened for me, and I think many people on the Christian path may be able to speak to that as well. That can really happen, where you stop really hating, and instead you start being more like, actually, they're just lost. They're just fallen, like I was, like I am. And we're all going to be like that unless we're oriented correctly, unless we're initiated into something. So again, the point is, it's more that wiser, deeper spirituality. It's not about jumping around and screaming and, having your shirt over your head or lecturing anybody else about, theology or anything like that. It's a more bittersweet, profound, deep spirituality of the seasoned man that I think that's on offer for us. And I remember with this actually, years and years ago, a woman who I was dating, I remember, I try not to drink these days. It's not particularly good for someone like me. But years ago, I'd been out and had some drinks. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I realised I shouldn't really drink. And she said, did you enjoy it? I said, well, I guess I did in the moment. And she said, well, it's worth it then. And I remember even then thinking, that's the attitude of modernity. If I had passing enjoyment, it was worth it. But how spiritually dead is that? It's so spiritually dead. What the masculine, the all souls really, but the masculine soul especially craves isn't just this happiness and passing pleasure. It craves meaning. It craves its journey back towards its source. It craves being oriented and illuminated. And that might happen within challenges. It might mean hardship. It might mean the narrow road, as the Christian tradition calls it. But that is really actually what sustains us, not passing pleasure, which is why I felt bad at that time. And again, I tend to find if I'm very healthy and I'm living the narrow way, personally speaking, all right, it's hard, but I always feel better in the long run. When I look over it over time, you're like, yeah, I'm on the right track. I'm showing up to life in the right way as a man. And most importantly, my soul feels oriented. And if your soul's not oriented, it doesn't matter what's happening externally. It could be amazing, it could be terrible. You're just never going to be able to bear it either way. So again, that's number one. I found the spiritual life, and that allows us to mature through a lot of it. And it has to be the real spiritual life, though. And again, that's a journey of it itself to find that. Number two, I think we have to almost challenge the red pill and the black pill a bit, and realize that you can find your way. A lot of the black pill is, black pilled. It's nihilistic. It's hopeless. And a lot of people like to wear that as almost like a cloak of protection. If I just imagine everything's bad, then I'm kind of safe. But in many senses, it's not always true. Now, the black pill types are right that not everybody is going to make it, but a hell of a lot more people, millions upon millions more, can than they will foresee. And I've seen that again in my own life and so many other people's lives. If you commit, if you're willing to make trade-offs with modernity and forget this idea of the virginal bride who's based and trad and the rest of it, you can have a good life. Like, you really can. I get it's hard with modernity, but you do have a solid chance at meeting a decent woman, having a good family. Like, all of that can happen. Yeah, there'll have to be trade-offs. Yeah, it's not all going to be easy. Yeah, it's not going to be like the trad channels show you, but it is something that's real, and your growth can align with that. Another one is, I think, another really important aspect of it all is a lot of people who adopt these ideas become almost anti-society, thinking they understand it all and society doesn't. But part of growing up is letting yourself be wrong. Just being like, I'm going to let go of all these intellectual models, and whatever really works needs to be integrated into my heart, not my mind. If you're in your head all the time, you'll freak other women out because you'll just be so constantly going over everything. I've met guys like that on dates. I can say, I've been on dates with them, but I'll be working with them and they will go on this date, and you can see they'll come back and feed me back the information, and you can tell you're in your head, you're judging this woman before you started, rather than letting a natural energy dominate and give you some life, really, so some genuine connection with another human being. But when we're in our head and sort of anti everything, we sort of become outside of society, and in many ways we do that for protection, and I sympathize with it. But there is a role that we can also play, and we have to have a sense of community, something we're growing into, and if we don't, again, we become almost lost. And this leads to the next point, and this has been very key in my life. The brotherhood is really key. It needs to be spiritually growth focused. It can be based. You can have elements of the red pill and the harsh truths of life, but it's what do you do about them? What's the ultimate telos away from selfism? And selfism is just more modernity. That's the problem with all this Rollo Tomasi, red pill, Andrew Tate stuff, is where does it really lead? Well, it's just back to me. What can I do for me? And that's not really going to satisfy you. And with that, I think, again, it's all about that journey of the soul, which transcends all of this. And for those who poo-poo it, well, just let them poo-poo it. They can live in that fallen state if they wish. You have to be open to maturing beyond it. And if you don't, you'll just stay lost. Now, that's not to say that, these guys don't sometimes have a point. But again, it's all about integrating where the truth is. And you can work with it rather than against it, I think the physical and personal practice, personal development, being jacked, the rest of it, that's all good, but it's all secondary to the journey of the soul, because the journey of the soul is what sustains you when the floor falls away, or life tempts you with excess pleasure. That's what really holds you together and will allow you to see through all of this. Finally, I think another thing to say about all of this stuff with modernity and the challenge of women and the liberal messaging and lack of initiation, lack of elders, lack of tradition as men, is there needs to be a bit of a mindset change from we're screwed to, look, it's going to be freaking tough, but this is an opportunity. And throughout, human history and the history of men, the hard times always sharpen that masculine edge within us, and you either meet the challenge and grow and take the wisdom on offer that's there for us that might take years, decades, or you're just basically swallowed by it. An avalanche falls upon you and you're just buried alive, and you're sort of an unperson for the mass of your life. But I think, again, if we do have the willingness to work together to learn, we can grow through a lot of these things. And of course, it's very much my mission, both with the coaching and the Substack community and the courses linked below, to try and aid men on those journeys. If you do feel like you need some help with this, Do feel free to reach out to me, re the coaching or the courses, or join the Substack community. All the links are below. Other than that, do subscribe to this channel if you're new. Take care, friends.